Let's kick right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking something super fascinating, the evolution of autism support. It's an incredible journey looking at how we've moved from, honestly, a pretty rigid focus on compliance all the way to a modern emphasis on autonomy and assent. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the roadmap for today. We're going to cover the origins of ABA, unpack what stimming and masking actually mean, listen to the voices pushing for systemic change, and finally, look at how support systems are being reformed right now. So I want to start by throwing this question your way. How does a widely used, medically mandated therapy end up at the very center of an intense human rights debate? It's a heavy question, right? To really get it, we need to look impartially at both the medical history and the social justice movements that are completely redefining what therapeutic success even looks like.
All right, let's jump straight into our first section, the origins of ABA.
Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA. It's a scientific discipline deeply rooted in behaviorism, popping up back in the 1960s. At its core, it's all about modifying observable behaviors through reinforcement. It's basically manipulating the environment to increase or decrease specific actions. Now, the science itself, it's just science. But the ethical concerns we're going to talk about didn't come from the science itself, but rather how it was historically applied to autistic individuals without them really having a say in it. Check out the stark contrast here. Back in the day, the historical goal of early ABA was literally to make autistic individuals appear indistinguishable from their peers. It was all about forcing neurotypical conformity, which totally invalidated their authentic experiences. But the reformed goal today, it's completely shifted. Now it's about supporting authentic engagement while being an autonomy. It's no longer about forcing someone into a neurotypical mold.
To really grasp what these early interventions were trying to change, let's move into Section 2, Understanding Stimming and Masking.
You've probably heard the term stimming before. It stands for self-stimulatory behavior. This means repetitive movements, sounds, or actions. Historically, early interventions labeled this as a problem that absolutely had to be fixed because, well, it just didn't look neurotypical. But here's the reality. Stimming is an incredibly vital coping mechanism. It's a natural, self-regulatory tool used to manage sensory overload, handle intense emotions, or just soothe racing thoughts. To give you a picture, this could look like flapping hands when super excited, flicking or snapping fingers, rocking back and forth to self-soothe, maybe repeatedly turning lights on and off, or repeating certain words. And honestly, we all stim a bit, like jiggling your foot or chewing a pen during a meeting, but it's a core essential feature for many autistic folks. Just to put that into perspective, an estimated 44% of people with autism report engaging in some type of stimming. So we're talking nearly half. It's hugely prevalent and deeply embedded in how many autistic people navigate their day-to-day lives. And this brilliantly illustrates the modern take on the topic. A study published in the Autism Journal actually interviewed autistic adults, and they fundamentally objected to treatments that try to take these behaviors away. As the quote says, they argue these behaviors serve as highly useful coping mechanisms. If you eliminate the stimming, you're literally taking away their primary tool for self-regulation. Which brings us right to autistic masking. When society, or specific therapies, penalize natural traits like stimming, autistic people learn to suppress or hide them just to blend in with neurotypical norms. They mask. And sure, masking might help you avoid immediate social friction, but research is very clear on this. Long-term masking is linked to severe psychological harm, anxiety, depression, and a profound loss of personal identity. It takes a massive toll. As those long-term psychological impacts became clearer, the community mobilized. Let's look at Section 3, Voices for Systemic Change. Back in the 2010s, the hashtag ABAisAbuse movement really blew up on social media platforms. Driven largely by autistic self-advocates, it gave adults a platform to share their real, lived experiences with early, compliance-focused ABA. They detailed how being forced to suppress their natural behaviors caused lasting trauma. And this movement was a massive catalyst, seriously pushing professional organizations to reckon with past harms and rethink their approaches. So the crucial point is that the very definition of a successful therapy is fundamentally shifting. In behavioral science, this is called social validity, meaning are the goals actually meaningful to the person receiving the therapy. Historically, this was defined entirely by neurotypical norms. Autistic voices just weren't in the room. But today, modern social validity demands that therapeutic goals are directly grounded in the experiences, preferences, and well-being of autistic individuals themselves. Now, alongside this digital advocacy, we saw a huge rise in self-diagnosis online. And this is a super nuanced topic.
On one hand, self-diagnosis gives people vital validation and completely bypasses the crazy financial and systemic barriers to getting a formal medical diagnosis. It helps people find their community. But on the flip side, professionals point out the risks. Autism traits can overlap with things like ADHD or anxiety, so misdiagnosis definitely happens. Plus, there's an ongoing ethical debate about ensuring online, self-diagnosed voices don't inadvertently drown out formally diagnosed individuals who are dealing with major systemic inequities every single day.
To truly address those inequities, we have to look at the systems providing care. Let's move to our final section, reforming autism support systems. To really see how systemic barriers work, just look at this comparison of global funding models. In the US, autism support relies heavily on ABA because insurance mandates actually classify it as a medically necessary treatment. But jump over to the UK, and the NHS prioritizes developmental and social communication interventions over ABA. Meanwhile, Australia's NDIS funds ABA, but places it right alongside other developmental models. So why does this matter to us? Well, in places like the US, financial barriers drastically limit a family's choices. If insurance only pays for ABA, families who want a different developmental approach are kind of stuck. They either take the ABA or they risk being pushed toward totally out-of-pocket, sometimes unproven and unregulated alternative therapies. We absolutely need systemic financial reform to give families real, equitable choices.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the absolute cornerstone of modern ABA reform, assent-based practices. When ABA is utilized today, the ethical standard demands assent. This means constantly prioritizing the ongoing agreement from the individual. It's about respecting their autonomy, their comfort, and their willingness to participate. If a child withdraws their assent, the therapy pauses, period. It completely flips the dynamic from coercion to collaboration.
And to make this the gold standard, the training for board-certified behavior analysts, or BCBAs, has to evolve. The source data gives us a super clear blueprint for this. Step 1. Integrate trauma-informed care so practitioners actually understand how harsh techniques trigger trauma. Step 2. Mandate training in assent-based practices so they know how to read distress cues and honor boundaries. And Step 3. Actively include autistic voices in the training process itself, because you just can't truly support a community without understanding their lived experience. So as autism interventions continue to rapidly evolve, it leaves us with a critical question. How will the medical field ensure that the voices of the neurodivergent community don't just participate, but actually lead the way? Moving from harm to healing requires a fundamental shift, one where autonomy is a prerequisite, not a privilege. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep questioning how we can build a truly inclusive world.